My name is Mary Ray, and I would like to welcome you to the Technical Libraries Have I Got a Story for You. Our guest storyteller today has agreed to share with us just a small portion of his many, many experiences here in the more than 30 years he's worked at China Lake. The stories today will focus on VLAB. That's the Vietnam Laboratory Assistance Program. Really, it's kind of a predecessor to a lot of the programs that are in place today that sends the scientific and technical experts out into the field with the warfighter. Please join me in welcoming Bud Sewell.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure for me to get to talk to you about the Vietnam Laboratory Assistance Program. And by the way, I did come in a way that I could be identified. I was told one time that it had been reported that somebody was coming out to see me, and he had been told that if he doesn't have on white shoes and isn't carrying a guitar, it isn't the right person. The thing is, I did wear white shoes quite regularly. Tom Amley wore red shoes, but I wore white. Mine was in memory of Enrico Fermi, because I took my quantum mechanics from Enrico Fermi, and while he was teaching me quantum mechanics, he wore white shoes, all right? He looked as if he was off to the tennis court at any moment. And it was a very enjoyable time. He came out to Berkeley one time and taught one course, and I managed to get to take it. The guitar has just been one of those things that's gone with me. This isn't the same guitar that I carried when I first went to Vietnam. It is the guitar I carried the 5 times later. The first 2 times I took one over and left it there while I was back for a short while, and then came back, and then I left it there. But a guitar does sort of go with me. But now about VLAB, the Vietnam Laboratory Assistance Program. It was started in about 1967, actually based on a trip to Vietnam by the director of Navy Laboratories, who thought that he could come up with a way that technology could solve the problems of Vietnam. Well, he went back and set out a program, and that's the program I'm going to tell you about. I have opinions about it, both good and bad. I will try to get those over because I think some of them are quite important. The first man to go over from China Lake was Fred Davis. You may not have heard of him. Some of you know of him. Fred had a special job. He had a group that was called Techniques and Devices, and he reported directly to Bill McLean. The thing is, he was chosen for the first assignment. He did a tremendous job at 3MAF, where he was assigned. And he sent back some problems, one of which was a problem on bridge defense. They had a problem that swimmers were attaching 200-pound charges to the bridge piers and were disabling the bridges. And the question came back, can you do something to protect the bridge piers against 200-pound satchel charges? I worked on a design, sent it back to them, and one of the things they were quite proud to show me when I actually wound up there was that they had taken the suggestion, they had started the actual project of putting those into place. Interestingly enough, they worked, and that's part of the problem. It was a partial solution. All I did was change the ante. They now had to use 2,000-pound charges. I didn't decrease the number of bridges being blown. I just changed the nature of how they did it. They didn't even need to worry about attaching it. All they had to do was get it under the bridge when it went off, and it was underwater, and it threw the water up and lifted the whole bridge off the pier pilings and all. So I really didn't do much on solving the problem on bridge defense. And I think this is a problem you face many times when you solve a small problem and you aren't ready for what you've done when you've changed the ante. A similar problem occurred for a man very famous in the Army side of the things, who went to Vietnam, observed the fact that the Army was losing 100% of its tanks per year from damage from landmines that were 15-pound box mines. This really bothered him. He said they ought to be able to fix up an armor kit to go under the tank to protect it against those. So he came back and worked on that, and he forced it through, and it was put in. Again, it was a partial solution to the problem. Up till that time, we had, let's say, 100% turnover of tanks. We had 0 fatalities and 3 casualties in the entire thing. The 15-pounder did do damage to the tank enough to require that it go out of country for repair. We had 3 broken feet, if you will, on the drivers. After the thing, they changed the ante, they moved to 45 pounds. You now wound up with 100% fatalities in the tank. Again, have you solved the problem adequately to really do the job? Okay, now let's get back to VLAP. VLAP was an idea we were going to send people over to be with the troops in the field. We essentially sent 6 reps at a time to Saigon and 2 to the 3rd Marine Amphibious Force at Da Nang. They were to go out in the field, talk with people, get the problems back to the laboratories. And the laboratories then were to solve the problems in 28 days for $20,000 and get the answer back over. Well, again, they didn't always work quite that way. It wasn't always done for $20,000. We sometimes tended to overexpend a bit. It also sometimes took longer than 28 days. But again, the pressure was there. This is what we wanted to do. And the idea was great, and that is to get the problem down at the working level before the problem has been thoroughly staffed. We had an organization in Vietnam called MACV, which was the military command of the armed forces in Vietnam, and he had a science advisor who, when I first went over, was Professor Macmillan. Professor Macmillan from UCLA was the MACSA, that is MAC science advisor. And he and his group put out a summary of what was going on in the way of R&D in Vietnam. And this represented the fully staffed problems. And they had priorities on them. So the majority of the technical problems that were of interest were and the highest priority, which said that they had to be solved or we wouldn't be able to win in Vietnam. The thing is, the problem with the fully staffed problem is that every one of them violated at least one law of physics in order to have made it to the fully staffed position. Every problem that could be solved before that was taken out at lower levels of the staff by somebody saying, oh, that's not a problem, all you have to do is do this. But if we put these words in, now it becomes an important problem. And this was put out, and it is a fascinating thing to look back on. Indeed, the problems were unsolvable because they violated laws of physics. We had answers to the problems at a lower level. We did not have an answer to any of the problems on the McVie significant problem list. When the program started, the idea was to send people over for 4 months for the tour in country, at which time they were supposed to have gained a lot of experience. When they came back, they would be resource people for the laboratories on what the actual problems were like. Well, as I said, Fred went over. The next man who was supposed to go over was John Boyle from the Aviation Ordnance Department. Some of you know that John did a tremendous amount of work on passive radar homing for the Sidewinder missile. He also did a lot of work on small boats and radar stealth addition to small boats. He was set to go, and he had a stroke. And I remember because I got a call from Hack Wilson. He said, Bud, I know how you feel about this, but you're going anyway. The thing is, the program required that you submit a volunteer statement. As far as I know, I'm the only participant in the program who never submitted a volunteer statement. I had been in the Pacific for a while in World War II. I didn't leave anything behind. There was nothing that made me desire to go back. But anyway, I went. Now, before I went, Fred had returned, and the Marines had contacted the base saying that it would be much better as far as the Marines were concerned if I go there for 2 months, come back here for 2 weeks, and then come back for the next 2 months. And so my orders were written that way. By the way, it worked. It worked beautifully for me. The 2 weeks back here were the busiest I ever spent on the station because we had sent back enough problems. There were enough people working on the things that it was exceedingly important for me to actually tell them what the actual problem was that they were trying to solve. This created a bit of a problem when I was coming home from my first tour at Da Nang. I had to come out through Saigon, and there was a Navy captain who was there visiting the Navy Research and Development Unit, Vietnam, who worked for the Director of Navy Laboratories, and he said, "You're ruining the program." He said, "I'll block you." Well, he didn't manage to block my going home. I came home. But he did get a thing sent out that Sewell will not return to Vietnam. And the Director of Navy Laboratories came out to chew me out in person. He softened his position a bit. One, I was a little surprised. Nobody from the base defended me. on the fact that those were the orders I was traveling on. I told him he didn't represent, if he thought he was threatening me, he wasn't succeeding. There was nothing that I wanted to go back to Vietnam for. I was perfectly happy to stay here and not go back again. Within the few minutes there with him, he changed his mind and softened his position, and I was allowed to return to Vietnam. In some respects, it may have helped. When I arrived at Da Nang, I felt that I had 3 strikes against me, and I was arguing the call on the 3rd strike. Combat troops really do not appreciate a civilian being added to their midst that they have to take care of. I was a bloomin' nuisance. I also represented a threat to the commanding general because I had a separate means of communication back to Washington that did not go through him. It was a real question. He wasn't sure that he wanted to have me on his staff in the midst of his operations. And I think that the one of getting in a fight with the Director of Navy Laboratories and taking the Marine side in the thing helped me tremendously. We'll talk about that a little further at the end. There you'll see there's a document over here which is an award. It's a Marine Corps commendation given to me by General Cushman. As far as I know, of the 28 representatives that we sent to Da Nang, I am the only one that ever received a Marine Corps commendation.
What did you do to stir everybody up?
Part of it was getting in the fight with the Director of Navy Labs and taking the Marine Corps position. And somehow, after that return, it's amazing how things went better. The Marines accepted me, finally. And when they did, it was total. They actually got to the point where they would turn the R&D office of 3MAF over to me, and they would go out in the field. And I would answer the dispatches and have my responses chopped by the G3. And it was, I just ran the office. I felt very much at home doing it, and I made some very close friends there at that time. And I say that may be part of the reason why I wound up with the Marine Corps Commendation. A further thing, in December of '67, which is pre-Tet, I was called in by the commanding general and told, Mr. Sewell, I am holding you personally responsible for the 2 main bridges at Da Nang. I went back to the G3 office and I said, what did he mean when he said that? And they said, we don't know, but if they go down, you better be on them. So it was an interesting thing to try to find out what all was going on, what they were doing, and what I could do to increase the capability that they had on protecting the bridges. As far as I know, the bridges are still standing. I think the major reason they did is that the VC were using them as much as we were. I really don't think that I had much to do in the way of actually saving the bridges. All right, here we are, people sent over, spend 4 months, go back to the laboratories and help out there, and we send other people over to do the job. Well, we kept doing that for that period of time. Just after I left, I was replaced by Art Breslow, B. Arthur Breslow, who came over and got there just in time for Tet of 1968. This caused enough of a shakeup that they decided in the program that there would be a change, and that is that the laboratory coordinators, East and West Coast laboratory coordinators, would go to Vietnam every 6 months. Up until that time, Bob Roundtree had been the West Coast laboratory coordinator. Suddenly, as soon as that message came out, I became the West coordinator, and Bob moved on to other things. This speaks well for Bob's intelligence, and he was in Code 12 at the time. So anyway, by the way, those of you who don't know it, Code 12 was the weapons planning group, also known as the intelligence community. So Bob did a wise thing in doing it, because his level of clearances caused problems in Vietnam. It required special protection every place he went. So it was a good idea that he didn't go on it. And I didn't get those clearances until I got back after the thing was over, after I was out of the program, which was also a good thing. All right. What's good and what's bad? One, as I already hinted, civilians really are not appreciated in a combat zone. Even though I was weapons trained, by the way, I was an officer in the Air Force at the time in reserve. I was qualified on all of the weapons they had. I had fired all of the weapons that the Marines had. I was not allowed to carry a weapon. In fact, I had a little card that said I was an unarmed civilian. It was a very small card. My wife at the time thought it should be a large thing carried on big plaque. This is an unarmed civilian, but you had 2 copies of it, one they could staple on your forehead. But the Marines did, every time I went out in country, they carried a spare weapon for me. But they asked me, please, if we wind up in an actual fight, would I please keep my head down and stay out of it? There were regulations that said you couldn't and shouldn't. Now, I won't say they weren't violated. We had one man from the base who was over there just when I got there, who was there on one of the problems that Fred Davis had handled, which was the Sewell water containers. Turned out that water was a problem in Vietnam. I guess it's a problem anytime you wind up with troops out in the field. Where are they going to get their drinking water? Well, they needed something they could drop out of helicopters that could stand at least a pretty solid bump and not rupture. And what they found was that the milk containers in country fitted the bill magnificently. And those were made by the Sewell company. And there were a plastic thing with a spout on them and everything else. Everything came with them. They even could control the water flow out. And plus, when they finished, were empty, the plastic was magnificent for waterproofing almost anything. Well, Bob Swallow had the Sewell water unit up at the next place up from us. I'm going to say, I'll think of the name of it. Anyway, he was there when they blew the ammunition supply point, which was where this Sewell water packing thing was located. And Bob Swallow was in there when it blew, and they expended 27 kilotons of ordnance in 6 hours. And it kept going for 6 hours. And Bob spent that 6 hours in a slit trench, hoping he was protected. And then he came down, they managed one of the first hits, took the Shoaly water thing out totally. So he was on his way back home when I met him on September 3rd in Da Nang. This is sort of thing, Bob survived it, but again, he was a civilian. He wasn't supposed to be there. All right, we had that problem. We had the other ones, as I say, of the people who set the program up didn't understand chain of command, if you will. Namely, they were trying to take the request from the 3rd Marine Amphibious Forces, have it go through a commander at the Navy Research and Development Unit Vietnam, and then through the Navy channels for chopping before sending back to the States. The commander of the Marine Amphibious Forces had 3 stars. He was not about to have anything of his chopped by a Navy commander. So whatever you do in an organization of this sort, please watch the chain of command. Do not try to make a 3-star general subordinate to a Navy commander. It was enough of a problem to have him handle ComNav 4V, who was a 3-star himself. The two were equal. So this is just one of thinking about the things in organizations. One, as I say, the communication back, a bad news thing all the way around, because they are suspicious by nature. I mean, these positions tend to be, even in the midst of a war, the positions are extremely political. So this is one to be watched for. How about successes? Well, the Vietnam Laboratory Assistance Program was judged to be the most effective of the R&D efforts in Vietnam. It had an amazingly good record. It handled 400 official problems that came back and were worked on by the laboratories, results sent over. Of those, 100 were given thumbs up by the forces in the field. Now that may not sound like much, but a 25% success rate is really quite excellent. There is a problem. 2 of them made it into the table of organization and equipment. That means, as far as lasting effects, 2 out of 400 were really accepted. And there's a message on those 2. Both of them were supported by the Systems Command. One was directly handled as a problem by the Systems Command, not by a laboratory. And the other one was fully supported by the Systems Command, who provided the capability, the funding required to send 20 of the units over to equip a squadron with the 20-millimeter gun pod for the OV-10, which was one of our problems here. The fortunate thing on that one is I happened to be in Washington and went to lunch with the guy that was responsible for that, and he told me that he had just canceled that program. And I got him to stop and reconsider and to talk with the guys at Channel Lake, because they had taken his thoughts into everything that had been done. He talked to them, he reversed his decision, and he funded the 20 additional units, which made it possible to go in and be successful. Now, I stress this because the East Coast coordinator, who was Gil Bowen from Naval Ordnance Lab at White Oak, always was pushing and bragging on the fact that VLAP was cutting out the red tape of the systems command. That we were cutting them out completely and getting the answers back to the people in the field. Yes, we got 100 thumbs up in the field. 2 made it into the table of organization and equipment. What does it say? It says, if you're doing an effort for this, get the systems commands in at a high level and interested and participating so that it's their program as well. Then you can win, totally win. And if you're dealing with the Marine Corps, believe me, it's a special game all by itself. The Marines are very, very sensitive about their R&D programs. You may actually have to go and spend some time with them at Quantico and get to understand their method of handling R&D before you deliver solutions to the Marine Corps. And if possible, get the Marine Corps to participate in your delivery to the field, to Marine outfits. They are special. They do take that extra consideration. And they, again, the Navy is a magnificent group to work with. I thoroughly enjoyed it. The Marines were a shade rough and tough at times. When I was in Da Nang with the Marines, I could go to the Air Force Officers Club. My Marine friends could not. They were not permitted there. It seems that one Marine full colonel named Roughhouse Taylor had broken up several of the officers' clubs, including the pianos. And so in the Da Nang area, Marines were not allowed to enter Air Force officers' clubs. The other weird thing, I'm not getting some of my own special things to tell you about. The Marines had a regulation while I was there that had been put on before Cushman took over, and that is Marine officers were not allowed to have liquor in their rooms, nor could they buy liquor at the Navy liquor store building over at the White Elephant. It was fascinating on that, just to show how things go around. My close friend that I worked with was Lieutenant Colonel Robert W. Oliver. He went with me one time when I went over to the White Elephant, and I went to the liquor store, and because I could pick up anything I wanted. And Chief Warrant Officer behind the desk looked at him and he said, "Pardon me, sir, but were you on the Hornet?" Bob said, "Yes." "Did you set up a special pay table for the top 3 grades?" "Yes." He said, "Commander Oliver, it's good to see you. What would you like?" So, let's see. I think that covers most of the things that I wanted to cover. I say the strong points. We did get problems before they got staffed. Newt Ward, who was the coordinator at China Lake of the program, that shows you the weird things. As the West Coast coordinator, I funded China Lake. Newt Ward was the VLAP at China Lake. He funded my office. Only at China Lake it could happen, all right? But Newt said that his feeling was that what you really needed in the program was not a technical person over there, but a supply person. Because for most of the problems, many of the small problems, a Herter's catalog or a Sears catalog would solve most of the problems. It was absolutely astounding, but it's true. The Marines wanted some spotting telescopes. The Marines up at Cantien asked for them. It seemed like such a good idea. They sent it out on a thing to check with all the other places, all the artillery spots. Would they like a spotting scope? And the answer was yes, 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 yes. Turned out they wanted 200 of them. They sent it back to Headquarters Marine Corps, who said it's impossible. We can't do it. The spotting scopes that are available in supply are not mil spec. We cannot do it. We will not do it. Through VLAP, we got some Herter's $60 zoom spotting scopes. Got about 6 of them, sent a couple of them up to Cantien, a couple to Quezon. The results were tremendous. They said it improved the accuracy of their gunfire tremendously to be able to see where the shells were hitting. Okay, each shell, the cost of each shell swamped the price of the spotting scope bought from Hertz. Herter's catalog. You have no problem. You didn't have to worry about it being mil spec. Those guys took care of that thing. It never saw a drop of rain. They took care of it personally. And they worked. So there indeed, Newt was right. Maybe a good catalog and a supply person could answer most of the problems if you catch them early enough. There's probably a lot of truth there. As you get the problems going up, they get worse. We had problems there with mines and booby traps. The mines and booby trap problem was exceedingly tough because we detected about 50% of those that we know of for sure. Of those 50% we detected, 90% were detected by the human eye. Electronics and all the rest, and we tried many, many things for detecting mines. They didn't work. It isn't that they didn't detect. It's just that the false alarm rate was so high that you couldn't use them. Imagine, if you will, trying to clear a road for use. You had to sweep it every day. The Marines went down there swinging their electronic sensors of various types, and we had some great ones. We found out most of them were turned off. Why? Because when they had them turned on, they found so many things that they couldn't sweep the road in the time available to sweep it. Okay, now does it get rough on those? Yes. My first day in Da Nang, first full day, they wanted to take me out. There was a bridge that the Seabees had built that they wanted me to see, and we started off and we had to wait for about an hour while they swept the road. We started down the road, and about 100 meters ahead of us, they blew a command detonated bomb placed in the roadway. It happened to be blown under a Vietnamese truck bus. It had 42 people aboard. All of them were injured to some extent. 6 were killed outright, 12 required medevac, and all the rest were injured. And that was 100 meters ahead of me. Let me tell you, for the rest of the ride, we went the miles and miles to go to get out to this bridge. I was looking at every piece of the road that I could see, trying to figure, are we doing the right thing? And really asking the question, what am I doing here? I was also impressed with the young Marines there. Here they were, most of them 18 years old, 18 and a half. They took over and organized that problem there. None of the people in the village would come out and touch them. They had them separated as to those who required medevac, those who were dead, those who required, they could give self-help to, and they were doing it. And I was impressed. I felt sort of useless. I came up to the thing, since I was with a group of officers. They thought I was somebody important because one of them said, "Sir, should I apply a tourniquet to this woman? She does not seem to be responding to any of the pressure we can apply." I said, "Sounds like what you're supposed to do, isn't it?" He said, "Yes, sir." But they were good. And as I say, I had a grand time. And if there are any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer any questions you have on the Vietnam Laboratory Assistance Program.
Do you have an example of one of the unsolvable problems?
Oh yes, one that was a problem was the caves down near the, I guess it was Seven Sisters areas or something like that, the mountains over there near the Cambodian border. The thing is, you could see people operating in these caves. And they wanted to be able to fire at them. Well, we already had walleye. Easiest thing in the world to call in a walleye strike and hit any of those caves you wanted. No, the requirement was that whatever guidance used could not be affected by weather or foliage. Well, now almost every system we've got or had at the time was affected by either weather or foliage. But it didn't mean you couldn't have solved the problem and hit the caves 90% of the time or more. But they kept adding to the problem that it was supposed to be able to be done in spite of anything, unaffected by anything. Okay, now when you're using sensors to do the job, you've got, I mean, you're subject to the problems. Yes?
I think you may have just answered my question, but earlier you said the most significant problems violated laws of physics, and my question was that in the statement of the problem or the desired solution?
That's an interesting way you have of bringing that one up, because the problems initially stated were straightforward, such as the one of saying, I want to hit a certain target. The requirements, there were requirements put on the solutions. And it was there that the thing came in violating the laws of physics. And again, if you could catch it before it was fully staffed, you had a chance of solving the problem. I didn't finish the rest of the thing. I said, again, on the percentage of problems, what happened with we detected 50%, the other 50% went off. For every mine and booby trap detonated, we suffered 2 casualties. That was the average. When it happened to be one of our own Bouncing Betty mines, 4 fatalities per detonation. We had a very good mine there. But the average overall was 2 casualties per detonation, which means that the enemy, in putting these things in, got essentially 1 casualty per emplacement that we know of. We hit problems with our minefields. We didn't keep them under surveillance. If you place a minefield and do not keep control and observation of it 24 hours a day, every day of the year, it isn't your minefield. The other guys watched you put it in. They know where they are. By the time they finish with them, you don't know where your minefield is. We had a minefield at ASP-1. It's one that led us to bring fuel air explosives over to try to solve the problem. The Marines suffered 27 casualties, including 2 fatalities, in 10 days that they tried to clear their own minefield. Because when they went in following the safe path, it wasn't safe. We provided most of the ordnance that was used against us. The situation is still bad and is still there facing us. The dud rate is still something in the neighborhood of 14% on our ordnance. That provides a lot of munitions out there to be used against us. All right. Any other questions? I'd be glad to try to. Yes, Jean.
If you forget about the politics, this is an ideal situation. You take the problems in the field, and then you figure out the solutions. Do you think you could have and got the solutions back so they could be used? Do you think that would have really helped anything? Or would they have just come up with bigger problems as the groups were mentioning?
Jean asked a very good question there on if we did everything perfectly, would it really have made any difference? I very much doubt that technology would have won the war for us in Vietnam, and I very much doubt that technology will win the war for us in Iraq. because some of the problems we're facing there are not technology, but people. And we haven't really found an operational solution for that at present. And reading Jim Irvine's things, which he sent me, the latest one was on essentially basic science and its effect on what's going to happen in warfare. I'd have to say we're not in good shape on that, on science and technology of even solving our own problems. And any time that you wind up with somebody telling you that 90% of the universe as we know it is material we don't know or understand, namely the dark matter, if that is indeed the case, we don't have an operating science at the present time. And here I thought I'd done so well in studying physics. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm working to try to put together a capability here to provide technical solutions to problems for the people in Iraq and Afghanistan. Any suggestions?
Well, my suggestion is definitely one, it's always worth a try. You have the feeling you want to do something. There are problems that you can solve, and there are problems if you can get to them early enough. If you require that they be fully staffed before you see them or you receive them, they won't do any good. You won't get the problem. You won't get the problem in its solvable state. The other one is definitely do get your systems command behind you 100%. I'm not just saying butter them up, although if that's what it takes, do it. But they have got to be there, they've got to cooperate with you and be a part of what you're doing, especially if it's in one of their areas that they have supported here, is you're going to take a solution over before they think it's ready to go. Okay? One, maybe it isn't ready to go. Anything that goes over needs to be really checked for service capability. Now, one of the things years back that I referred to as the 3 sheets to the wind test. It turns out that fatigue poisons are alcohols. When you get a person in an extremely fatigued condition, alcohols are in his system and are acting just like ethyl in there. They are poisoning him and they're poisoning his capabilities. The average combat person is under extreme stress, lacking sleep, everything. And it's what happens when a person drinks. They lose their most recently acquired physical skill. This is part of the reason why it's exceedingly hazardous for kids to drink and drive. Most of them have just learned to drive. Drinking puts them in the thing with a weapon there at their disposal, and they have lost that last skill they've acquired. So when you give a person a device to use in combat, remember that it's as if he is 3 sheets to the wind. It's got to work just like something that he's been used to working with all the way through. Again, we made the same mistake in Vietnam. We took the M14s away from the Marines and gave them M16s. The results were disastrous. You won't find many of them documented because when the guys could come in out of the field, they would report to us. They'd come in and see us and tell us how terrible the things had been with the M16. We'd get their first report there. They would then go over to China Beach for R&R. We'd see them in a week or two and try to get them to continue. They weren't interested in pursuing it at all. So you won't find the troubles with the M16 as documented as they should have been. And by the way, on that one, the problem there was on the specification and paying too much attention to a specification. The specification of the M16 revolved completely around the weight of the system, because the gun itself had to be so light that you could carry lots of ammunition. By the way, who cares how much ammunition you carry if it jams on the second round? All right? If, after they had finished the thing, if they had relaxed the thing by a half a pound to go into the weapon, there could have been 2 orders of magnitude improvement in the reliability of the weapon. That's from the Colt people themselves. So, again, we have a problem. Don't send people into the field with equipment they aren't used to using, because they're going to be 3 sheets to the wind whether you like it or not. And whatever you send over there has got to work, and work simply and straightforward. And I'd recommend that those of you who might like to search a thing, search out a Lieutenant Colonel Jensen, Jenson, the Signal Corps of the U.S. Army. In 1943, I think it was, he did a study of why new equipment delivered to the field failed in introduction. And he found a series of things, and based on that, he set up a unit which the chief signal officer backed. And by the end of the conflict in World War II, no theater would accept an electronic piece of electronic equipment not introduced by NEID. Okay. How bad were things? The Air Force in World War II had about a 95% rejection ratio on things sent to the field. The Navy was running about 90%. The Army was about the same. The Air Force was a little worse because we were trying more technology. And then to have this guy hit the 100% of everything introduced by NEID was accepted. So there's a message in how he did it. It's worth trying to look up. You might Jensen, Lieutenant Colonel Jensen, and the outfit was the New Equipment Introductory Detachment of Signal Corps. The thing is, the reason I know about NEID is some of my close friends were in it. Yes?
Hey, Bud, do you know of any Walton Bird songs?
Any which?
Walton Bird songs?
Well, that's an unfair question. But when coming from Scott, it has to be answered. And the answer is, I know a little about some of his songs, and I know of one that was based on Gilbert and Sullivan, which was sung at a Sidewinder party. Although it was not, this was after Walt had left us the first time. All right. On a tree by a junk pile an old sparrow sat, singing winder, sidewinder, sidewinder. And I asked, looked at the sparrow bird, why do you sit singing winder, sidewinder, sidewinder? Is it weakness of intellect, sparrow, I cried, or too many parts in your little inside? With a shake of his poor little head he replied, winder, sidewinder, sidewinder. But one that Walt used to sing, he sang in the abbreviated version, and when he was here for the reunion and so on, the anniversary, he added quite a bit to it, but it used to be sung, on the road to Inyokern, where the missiles twist and turn, you can hear the rockets chuffing from Ridgecrest to Inyokern. On the road to Inyokern, where the missiles twist and turn, and the dawn comes up like thunder, or be mountain cross the way. All right, that and we have all, it's amazing how many songs there are that you can sing on the various things that you pick up in wandering around, especially with the military. Some are absolutely indecent, and some just partly so. One, that was my experience, this is going back to ancient days again. It happened that in 1946, I was officer of the day in Tokyo. And I was officer of the day that they put Australians on the honor guard position. And so I had to work with the Australians, including inspecting them before they went on duty. And they went on duty with fixed bayonets, and they had to inspect them in the thing as they would place the bayonets on. It was the loudest clanging, banging of steel-rimmed heels on marble floors that you've ever seen. They were something else again, and they taught me one song that got picked up. It was, I'll just sing part of it. I don't want to be a soldier, I don't want to go to war. I just want to hang around Piccadilly Underground, living on the earnings of a high-born lady. I don't want to bayonet up me, I don't want me bollocks shot away. I want to stay in England, in merry, merry England, and Roger all my bloomin' life away. Gor blimey, call out the army and the navy, call out the rank and the file, call out the loyal territorials, they'll face danger with a smile. Gor blimey, call out the members of the old brigade, they'll set England free. Call out your mothers, your sisters, and your brothers, but for God's sake, don't call me.
Thank you very, very much, Bud. We have a certificate of appreciation for you, as well as a full-size copy of your own poster. And I would like to ask at each and every one of you, please be sure to fill out the survey that was left on your chairs. That's very important to us. And as always, if you have a story or know someone else that does, please let us know. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, over here are some of the things that I brought back from some of the things in Vietnam, including this particular one, which I say is a rarity. That's a Marine Corps commendation given to me. If you read the commendation, you may ask what was the 3rd Marine Amphibious Force doing. They credit me with a whole bunch of things. This is the thing that was given out to those who participated in the VLAP effort. This is signed by Robert Frosch, who was Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research and Development. And again, we were supposed to be a group to be called upon for keeping everything alive in this. And this is the China Lake version of the award that we gave to the people who were involved in going over. And this is the 3 MAF, 3rd Marine Amphibious Forces. That was to me. It was made with Vietnamese lumber, and it sort of has done a little distortion here. All right, that's it.
Those who, it's been said that those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it. And I hope that you younger generation here who have lots of ideas and are gung-ho about solving the world's problems will listen to the voice of history and remember it.
Thank you, Jean.